Right, so what I'm going to do is just a quick canter through skills policy as a whole, what's going on in this country, just some key elements of that, and then dive into apprenticeships and what's key, what some of the issues are, but also what the great opportunities are. And I want to caveat all of this with the apprenticeship policy and the Levy approach is a fantastic opportunity. And we see, and our membership sees, real opportunity for everyone and employers, and something that will be embedded for a long time if we get this right. So anything I say is really just about making sure we get this right rather than being critical of the policy, and that's important. And the policy, the skills policy, and actually a lot of government policy is very much about the individual and the employer. It's the sort of social mobility and productivity. And you know, there's a tension there often about do we let employers drive everything, or do we make sure that we're also ensuring that those most disadvantaged or need the most help are supported. Now, it can be done together, but if you look at the apprenticeship policy history, for example, that was developed in BIS, the business department, very, very employer focused. What employers want, that's it. And then it moved into DFE, the education department, which was much more about the individual and the breadth of learning for the individual. And what we see at the moment is a bit of a tension going on about making sure those two are aligned. So where you see arguments about is it social mobility, is it productivity, it's both, but it's getting that right balance. The whole sort of skills, the whole education approach now, you'll see is sort of having three main streams. There's the academic route, which most of the civil servants know, which is GCSE, A-levels, university, into civil service. That's, you know, and then they churn through their families, and so it goes on. So there's that route. The other side is the apprenticeship route, very much work-based, in a job, training, developing, and then in the middle is the sort of vocational classroom-based route, which is where T-levels sit. So that's the sort of core offer that the government believes will deliver that middle stream. So I'll touch on bits of that, but there's a lot going on. You know, in FE we always say, oh, it's always changed. I mean, it is always change, and I think it always will be. It's about having an underlying strategy that for these building blocks to be sitting in, and I think we're at least seeing that. We haven't got quite a coherent approach, but we are definitely seeing that. And it's all about the individual doing something that's relevant, that ultimately they're going to get a job. I mean, it's all about getting a job in the end. Yes, education can be there for other reasons. Yes, training can be there for other reasons, but ultimately it's about getting a job and progressing. And what we're most concerned about is ensuring that young people in particular, but also adults that are in particularly lower level work, can see a pathway through, can see if I do this, then I can progress here, and then I can do further training, I can progress here, and there are no barriers or blocks, whatever route they choose to take. T-levels, it's really early days is all I'd say. There's lots of stuff at the moment about no one understands what T-levels is. That's partly because there's nothing to understand at the moment. There's no curriculum, the consultation hasn't even been responded to, the first consultation. If I were to describe it in simple terms, I'd say it was a BTEC with work experience. It's very much training in the classroom, in the workshop, but with a substantial work placement as part of it, and more hours training than we've seen traditionally in FE, predominantly in colleges. So that's the change. There are meant to be 15 sectors, so only 15 routes. If I told you that I think cabinet making and journalism is in the same route, you'll see that maybe there needs to be some subsections in there. But that's what it's about. It's about those 15 core routes, lots of training, and then a work placement. And the big concern at the moment is, will the work placements work? They're vital to the success of this, because as employers you'll know that work experience, that understanding of the workplace, that actually applying knowledge is so important. And we're working with the government at the moment, and we're saying actually the employers that are going to embrace this the most are probably the employers that have apprentices. So why not use the apprenticeship providers and those that are working with those employers to help facilitate the work placement? And actually it could be almost seen as an initial long interview for some going on to apprenticeships if that's what they want to do. So that's a T-level summary. You've got traineeships sitting sort of before apprenticeships. Actually a fantastic policy, very flexible, up to 6 months delivery, and the policy aim is about getting someone either into an apprenticeship, into a job, or into further learning. You couldn't get more flexible than that. Why aren't there hundreds of thousands of traineeships at the moment? Because the government's messing it up both in terms of their funding and how they monitor it, and we're in constant dialogue because it's not a broken policy, it's a broken implementation. But the idea of traineeships is that step before, it's that it's been included in the transition year of young people coming out of school and then moving into either a T-level or an apprenticeship. So whether it's called traineeships or something, it's about almost a program that looks at the individual, looks at their profile, generally quite spiky, what they need to do, fill in those spiky bits and then get them ready to move on to something else. So that's traineeships and how it fits in everything. Maths and English, big issues around maths and English. We're appalling in this country when it comes to maths. I think only 15% do maths beyond 16, which in other countries is just a terrible percentage. The introduction of core maths was an attempt to deal with some of that. Core maths is for those who've done GCSE but don't want to do A-level but can do some practical applied maths, because many universities complain that the young person comes out having done maths up to 15, doesn't do it for 3 years, and then they're going into a degree. You know, many of the social sciences need statistics and applied maths. So there are issues around there we're trying to deal with, but you'll read a lot about the retake policy, where the government's insisting everyone must do GCSEs up until 18. And that's a terrible, terrible thing, okay? It might seem the right thing from the outside, but actually GCSEs are not the right thing for everyone. And if you look at apprenticeships, I have never heard of an apprenticeship employer employing apprentice complain about the maths and English of that apprentice. And they're doing functional skills. It's relevant maths, it's functional maths, it's like percentages. You know, it's the things that they need in work, and it's made relevant to that vocational programme. But then we get told, well, the employers want, they like the brand GCSE, they like the certificate over and above everything else. Well, if I were to tell you that last year the pass rate, the pass mark for a GCSE higher paper was 18%, that's the amount of maths someone knew to get through the GCSE, then I would suggest that's not necessarily the best qualification to be judging people by. Now, obviously, many got higher than that, but what we're saying is, as a blended approach, GCSEs and functional skills. It's a big issue at the moment because the retakes, the pass rate's about 23%. There's mass failure going on where we could be helping these young people actually succeed in maths and English. So that's one. And then adult education budgets, again, very focused on supporting employers in particularly at the lower levels of learning around adults and some of those basic skills, maths, English, digital. It's being devolved. So those areas that have got mayors are now getting handed their adult education budgets. Seems very sensible. It seems like the areas will be able to identify the needs of London, the needs of Manchester, the needs of the Midlands, and be able to focus the training. The challenge for the sector as a whole on the supply side is that now there are 7 devolved areas and then the rest still national, and we're going to have to deal with different approaches in different ways. So there's a lot of debate about adult education and the devolved areas, and it's really about how it's going to work and how we're going to get the most efficient delivery. But that's adult education, and really I think the hope is that it's properly targeted at those that need it, those employers, those communities that need the support, whether it's English as a second language or whatever else. It is getting to the right person through the right provider and having efficient delivery. Now I'm going to move on to apprenticeships. So I just want to repeat again, we believe the policy is excellent. It's stunning that a Tory government introduced a tax on business for training. So when people ask, do you think it will reverse? I mean, if the Tories are bringing that in, it's unlikely Labour would ever reverse it. So it looks like it's here to stay. and what that levy is, how much goes back to employers is all up for grabs in the future. But basically, the message at the moment is the levy's here. It's going to stay roughly as it is, and we need to work with it. We actually believe that the levy will get used up quite quickly once employers get going. So a lot of the press at the moment is around the low numbers, and that's for two reasons. I'll pick that up in a minute. But transition in policy is always painful, and we're going through massive transition in the apprenticeship world, both on the product, so apprenticeships frameworks changing to standards, and in simple terms, if you were to summarise, it's moving from a sort of assessed model to more of a teaching model, and I'll explain a bit more on that. So it's a big change, and the actual assessment, the qualification is the endpoint assessment now, rather than something, an MVQ and everything else going during the apprenticeship. There's the supply side is going through enormous change as well, and there have been some real problems in the procurement of suppliers, both for the register and actual contracts to deliver to non-levy. Again, I could talk for hours on that. When I'm talking to providers, that's what I get hammered with. But you don't need to know about that, just that it's been hard, right? And so it's a really challenging time at the moment. What we're seeing is things starting to settle much more, a greater understanding coming through. It's been a year since the levy was introduced, and it's becoming clear what's working and what isn't working. And if I were to summarise very, very simply, I'd say in the levy world, levy employers, we can see how it will work. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it makes sense. The conversations that are going on. In the non-levy world, we're still in trouble. So the non-levy is employers with under £3 million worth of staff payroll. Over 60% of apprenticeships in the past were delivered through the non-levy employers, and at the moment there are disincentives in there that are putting employers off. It's very hard to do a generic, it's a disaster type of thing, because in some sectors it's fine, at some levels it's fine, in some parts of the country it's fine, but overall there are problems, and that's one of my jobs really, is to keep highlighting these problems and talking about them. So we think the levy, in the levy world, and the levy employers, numbers will start picking up over time. It's just taking time for everyone to work out what they want to do. Employers, as Pete said, it's been a year, but you've got 2 years to spend your levy. So as long as month 24 you're spending all your levy of month 1, you're all right. I would say I don't know any government policy that stayed the same for more than a few years, and I would start spending it a bit quicker, because you just never know what might happen in the future. But that at the moment is how things are. That's the levy world. In the non-levy, unless there's some changes in policy, I think we're going to lose more and more opportunities in those small employers. Many would say, well, the 10% contribution is one of the biggest factors in the non-levy world, that employers are now having to pay 10%, and many would say, well, that's nothing. You get 90% government funding. However, in some sectors where training is really important, that 10% is too much. The employers are saying, actually, you're asking us to do all the training, support the learner, we've got staff supporting them, we're doing all sorts of other things around those learners, often in lower wage, lower margin businesses or sectors, and you want us to pay 10%, go away. And I have stood up in front of university crowds who are looking at the great opportunity of degree apprenticeships and said, when you're all sitting in your care homes wondering where your care worker is, remember the day when you stole all their training money, right? Because there is an issue about balance here, and it's not saying one's better than the other, it's saying that we need a balance across all levels, across all sectors, across all employers, and making sure that's right. So that's the challenge. So what's the game changer? My view, the game changer is actually degree apprenticeships. That's the biggest game changer of all. This is individuals that were going to university, were ending up with 50 grand's worth of debt, and then over 50% of them weren't getting a graduate job. Now there's the opportunity to go into work at 18, the employer's embracing them because they're getting the same degree, the same training, which raises questions about how many contact hours a graduate gets under a normal full-time programme. So so the opportunities for the young person, no debt, they're being paid, they're getting relevant experience, they're applying their learning, and at the end of it, they're coming out with a job. They're still in a job, because an apprenticeship is a job. That's the most important definition. And the employers I'm talking to, for example, the engineering sector, is saying we're going to cut our graduate intake and start taking degree apprentices. And when you see that happening, young people and their parents are going to be looking and saying, actually, why would I go to university if actually the employers are saying, come to us direct? So in terms of the biggest game changer, I see that happening. Our worry is that too much of the levy will go on that, and so our demand, in a sense, is the £10 billion worth of fees that go to universities at the moment should be made available for degree apprenticeships as well, so that it's not about where you do your degree, it's about doing a degree and getting that funding, and I think there's real opportunity there. But apprenticeships are vital at every level. Degree apprenticeships are level 6. One of the things we've been arguing is if you don't have your level 2s and your level 3s, you're not going to have that flow through. So many jobs rely on level 2, level 3 starting points. So much of the issue around Brexit will be that those starting jobs, and if we don't have that training in place, supporting apprenticeships at those levels, we're in trouble as a nation. So it's about getting it right at all levels. So that, again, is the argument. It's not about either or, it's about making sure that those pathways are there all the way through. And you can see that particularly the large employers that are taking a strategic approach to this are looking at all levels of training in their organisation. At the moment, you can do an MBA apprenticeship. That's just been agreed. I do question how long that will last. It's not quite what was intended. I have told my senior team, if you want to do an MBA, now's the time to do it. And if there's one apprenticeship that I think everyone should have, it's a digital apprentice, because they come in with all the knowledge. They're better than anyone in the organisation. It's about channeling that knowledge into the organisation and applying it in the workplace. And it has transformed the approach of all our staff. When you get this young person saying, well, have you thought about doing it like this? We could do it like this. You know, we are paying them because they're an employee, but we should be paying them more just because of the impact they're having. So that's the excitement around what's happening. I'm going to touch on quality because that's really important. These things won't last if there's not quality there. And we have, as an organisation, AELP, have big issues with the Institute for Apprenticeships just because of the way they're doing things. And they're actually in front of the Select Committee this morning, and I'll be watching the recording of that later. They talk about they've realised that they need to do things faster and better. I have described it as better late than never. And you know, things need to get moving. One of the biggest complaints I have from employers is that we want to do standards, but the IFA haven't approved them yet. We want to wait for those, and so that's part of the delay in numbers coming through, because the Institute for Apprenticeships aren't getting things sorted. They have a very opaque way of deciding funding as well for frameworks and standards, so we're challenging them on that. And picking up Peter's point, the endpoint assessment and the quality regime around it, again, too much technical detail for today, but there are real issues there that need sorting out, and that's one of my jobs, again, with our endpoint assessment organisations, is to say, look, we want to do a good job, but at the moment, you're not guaranteeing reliable, valid and manageable assessment. And those are the sort of 3 key words in the assessment world. You want to make sure that everyone that's assessed is assessed in the same way across the country, across employers, and that you as employers know that if someone has that apprenticeship, it guarantees a standard. And that's not 100% certain across different standards at the moment. Many are good, but some are a problem. I always use the dental nurse, where the assessment is a 2,000-word essay and an interview, right? This is someone sticking their hand in your mouth. I would prefer it if someone was watching them stick a hand in the mouth before they stuck their hand in my mouth. And that's a level 3, that's an A-level equivalent. So there are one or two areas where things need to change a bit. I mentioned that I think the big shift as well, it's not a thing, it is. The big shift is moving in standards to much more a training model rather than an assessing model. And what Ofsted also is saying, which is a big shift, it's not about just ticking boxes and saying, yes, they've been through this. It's about proving that the individual has learned. So there's no point saying, yes, they've been in lessons to this, so they're fine now. It's how can you prove they've learned? So not only is it training, it's some form of what would be called formative assessment as you go along to make sure the learning is happening. So that's the shift in what apprenticeships are, but also the shift in what Ofsted are looking for. But it's an exciting model because it means actually providers like 3A can sit down with the employer and say, right, we can do this bit, but you're the expert here, you've got the experts here, we're going to use your staff to support us in the delivery. And you can create a model of delivery that's relevant to you as an employer while still meeting the standards that have been set. And actually quite a few employers are registering as employer providers, not because they want to lead the way and be beaten up by Ofsted and the ESFA, because there's a load of bureaucracy that you have to take as a provider, but actually to act as a subcontractor to do some of the delivery during the programme. And that's the exciting thing. The new partnerships that are developing are really exciting, and why, as Peter said, this will get embedded as an approach, not just for apprenticeships, but wider training as well, if we get this right. So you've got, particularly national employers, you've got from level 2, which is GCSE level, all the way up to level 7, which is sort of MBA level, across the country, across sectors. You know, every employer has a need for some of the sort of what I would call the more generic apprenticeships, like business process engineering or the finance or the HR, or there's a whole range of generic as well as the sector-specific training. And that's what a provider can do, a good provider can do, is come in and talk through that, and why we're seeing a change in the provider base as actually they're tooling up in a way to have those conversations in a way they've never happened before. And I do think we will see new collaborations, particularly in the independent training provider sector with universities, partly because they're the only ones that can award a degree. So if you want to do a degree apprenticeship, you have to have a university involved. But many of our members are having those collaborations with universities, but also the employers as well. And then a whole exciting range of technology, because there's much more flexibility about delivery through technology that we've just not seen before, because it's a training model rather than an assessing model. So really, I suppose in summary, what great opportunity I've talked about, when you hear the moans, it's about the non-levy employers, the SMEs, not getting the opportunity to deliver in the way they used to. So there's a need for a change in policy. So our plea to the Minister has been, at least for the next 12 months, for those aged under 25 doing a level 2 or a level 3 in a non-levy employer, or a levy one that's gone over their levy, make them free. Just to get things going again, just to see if that is what the problem is. And then we can review it in 12 months' time. What does that sort out? It sorts out the plummeting numbers in young people in apprenticeships, which is significant, the plummeting numbers in level 2s that are being delivered, which is significant, and the plummeting numbers in the SMEs. It sorts all three of those out in one swoop, we think. So that's what we're pushing at. It's not the whole system's broken, but something needs to be done around those areas. If we see that, that'd be great. If we hear Sir Jerry of the IFA actually saying positive things about level 2s, that would be nice, and I keep asking him to do that. He hasn't yet. And also an understanding that this country is not just made up of engineers and manufacturers. 80% of this country is service sector, and we need to talk about apprenticeships in all sectors in a positive way. I'm fed up of hearing the elitist snobs saying that level 2 in retail or hospitality has no value, when if you look at the transformation of those individuals from where they were to what they achieve at a level 2 and then what they progress on to, that is a core of what apprenticeships is, and we need to get that message out and get everyone talking in that way as well. So that's another part of the challenge facing us. But as I said, a lot of excitement, a lot of opportunity, And the fact that you're all sitting in this room is a transformation, because pre-Levy, only 15% of the largest employers had apprentices. Now I think it's 60% are registered to deliver apprenticeships. That in itself is an amazing change and something that we all need to work with and make sure it's sustainable in the long term.